A night of jasmine and dumplings. The crystal chandelier cast its light evenly over every face, laying down a thin veneer of gold dust. I sat at the head of the long table, facing the six-tiered birthday cake, a confection of white sugar roses, each petal pinched to perfection. My mother had ordered it 3 days in advance from the most renowned patisserie in town. 28, she said, was a significant threshold. It deserved to be marked properly. I wasn't entirely sure I wanted it marked at all. Every birthday dinner ran the same script, 30-odd relatives crowded around the table, Uncle Robert dozing off, Cousin Chloe scrolling through her phone, my cousin Kyle and his new girlfriend holding hands discreetly beneath the tablecloth. My mother, always immaculate in her tailored cheongsam, glided between guests with practiced ease. My father swirled a glass of red wine, deep in conversation with the older men about business I didn't understand. And I sat at the center, smiling until my jaw ached, cutting the cake, blowing out the candles, making wishes I didn't truly believe. The only difference this year was Gwen. She sat to my left, wearing a cream-colored knit top, quietly shelling pistachios. A small hill of empty shells grew by her hand. I stole glances at her. She caught me once and gave a small, wordless smile. We'd been together 2 years, and this was her first time at a family gathering of mine. Her palm had been clammy when I'd squeezed it under the table, cool and damp, smooth as jade. "When everyone's here," my mother said from my right, her voice low, her lips barely moving. Her gaze was fixed on Uncle Robert across the table, but the words were for my father. "Tell your son to go change the lock on her apartment." Her meant my grandmother. She lived at number 66, an old walk-up in the west end of the city. She hadn't been downstairs in 3 years. A fall had fractured her hip. Though she'd eventually regained the ability to hobble a few steps with a cane, my mother had decreed that the elderly shouldn't exert themselves, and so she rarely ventured out. She seldom appeared at family functions. My mother always said she was unsteady on her feet, or that she'd feel out of place. My father's fingers tightened on his wine glass. His knuckles went white for a moment. He was silent, then gave a short nod. "I'll go," I said. But Alan spoke up first. He sat to my right, wearing a navy blazer, his tie cinched with military precision, except for the top button of his collar, left undone. That was his tell. He was a surgeon, steady as a rock in the oar, but family gatherings seemed to trigger a low-grade allergy in him. He could never quite settle. "Now?" My mother raised an eyebrow. "The cake hasn't even been cut." "Won't be long." Alan was already on his feet, reaching for his coat on the back of his chair. "It's just a lock. Half an hour, tops." "Do you even know what kind of lock it is?" my father asked, frowning. "Mom told me before. I've got it written down." Alan patted his coat pocket, and I heard a soft jingle of keys. He moved toward the door, and as he passed behind me, his hand landed briefly on my shoulder. It was an old signal between us, "I'll be back soon, don't worry star." When I was a child afraid of the dark, he'd do the same thing whenever he passed my bedroom door. I was 28 now, and he still couldn't break the habit. The door closed behind him with a muffled thud. The hubbub in the banquet hall barely paused before resuming. Chloe was describing her new cat, Kyle's girlfriend had a bright, tinkling laugh, Uncle Robert let out a thunderous sneeze. My mother called for a waiter to bring more hot towels. Gwen leaned in. "Does your grandmother live alone?" she whispered. "Yeah. In an old walk-up on the west side." "When's the last time you saw her?" I paused. "When was the last time?" 3 months ago." "No, longer. It must have been Chinese New Year, when Alan and I had dropped off some groceries and stayed for 15 minutes, tops." She'd been sitting in her wicker chair by the window, a gray tartan blanket over her lap, the winter light outside as pale and washed out as her hair. She'd looked like a faded photograph of herself. It's been a while, I admitted. Gwen didn't press. She just pushed the little pile of shelled pistachios toward me, pale green and glistening. Eat, she said. Stop drifting off. All your relatives are watching. I tossed the nuts into my mouth, the salt and nuttiness dissolving on my tongue. The chandelier swayed overhead, dizzying, and the noise of the room washed in and out like tide. My father was telling Uncle Robert about the latest market trends, my mother was coaxing Chloe to have more lotus root stuffed with sticky rice, Kyle and his girlfriend were stealthily swapping a strawberry off a slice of Napoleon. No one mentioned my grandmother. It was as if she weren't in the same room. But she was in the family portrait on the wall, a 10-year-old photograph of her in a deep green cheongsam, seated at the center, her lips curved in a gentle smile. Back then, she could still walk on her own, her hair was salt and pepper, not white, and her eyes had that luminous spark, bright, very bright. I stared at the portrait for a long time, until my mother tapped my plate. Time to cut the cake. I snapped back. A waiter rolled over a silver cake knife with a white silk flower tied to the handle. The table launched into a ragged chorus of "Happy Birthday," voices out of sync, a few early, a few late, but at least everyone was smiling. I closed my eyes to make a wish. The candlelight trembled behind my lids, a warm orange glow. But what surfaced in my mind was the chipped iron door of my grandmother's apartment, the yellow electrical tape wrapped around the handle. She'd said it was to keep us from getting static shocks, though the door hadn't held a charge in years. She'd never taken it off. It's comforting to look at, she'd said. What did I wish for? I wished Gwen would like my family. I wished Alan would get fewer night shifts this year. I wished my mother would worry less and my father would come home for dinner more often. And I wished, irrationally, that my grandmother could be at my birthday party. I knew it was impossible. Her hip, the walk up, the 5 flights of stairs. It would be such an ordeal. But still, I wished. I opened my eyes and blew out the candles. Applause. My mother started serving the cake. The first slice went to me, a white rose with a gold-wrapped chocolate beside it. I picked up my fork but had no appetite. The clock on the wall read 7:50. Alan had been gone 20 minutes. The cake was half-eaten when I started glancing at the door. Gwen noticed. She touched my knee under the table. Your brother's still not back. No. He said half an hour. Maybe traffic. Or the lock turned out to be more complicated? I nodded, but unease was crawling up my spine. Alan was efficient, a lock change was a 10-minute job. If he said 30 minutes, he'd be back in 30. 8:10, Uncle Robert began yawning. Chloe and Kyle's girlfriend had swapped WeChat IDs. My father refilled his wine. My mother stood by the window, her back to the room, the line of her shoulders rigid. I walked over to her. Mom, I said quietly. Alan's not back yet. Should I give him a call? She turned. Her smile was in place, but her fingers gripped the teacup too tightly. No need, she said. He's a grown man, he's not going to get lost. Something probably came up. Then I'll sit back down and keep the guests company. Her voice wasn't loud, but it brooked no argument. You're the guest of honor tonight. Stop trying to run off. I returned to my seat. Gwen handed me a slice of watermelon. I bit into it, not sweet. 8:25, Chloe announced she had to leave, she had work the next morning. Uncle Robert had slumped back in his chair, emitting a soft, rhythmic snore. Kyle and his girlfriend were gathering their things. Let's wait, my father said abruptly. Alan will be back soon. We can all leave together. He rarely called Alan by his childhood nickname, usually it was just Ethan's brother, or Alan, but the sudden use of it quieted the table. My mother shot my father a look I couldn't decipher. She set down her teacup, walked to the door, and pushed it open to peer into the corridor. Empty, save for the sconces casting pools of warm light. She shut the door and returned, her steps slower than before. 8:35, I couldn't wait any longer. I pulled out my phone and dialed Alan. Rings. No answer. I tried again. Still no answer. Maybe it's on silent, Gwen offered. I stared at my screen, the knot in my stomach tightening. Alan never ignored my calls. Since we were kids, he'd always picked up, or, if he was in surgery, he'd at least text back, busy, call you later. Not even a message. 8:42. The banquet door swung open. Alan stood in the doorway, the corridor's dim light behind him. His coat hem was stained with something, dark brown, glistening wetly under the lights. His face was bloodless, almost translucent, his lips white. I shot to my feet. The chair legs scraped dully against the carpet. Alan. He didn't answer me. His gaze swept past the half-eaten dishes, past the startled faces, and locked onto my mother. His lips parted, his voice was barely audible, but because the room had gone completely silent, every word landed with devastating clarity. Number 66. Mom. Grandmother isn't there. Isn't there? My mother's voice shot up, then she forced it back down. Where is she? Did you change the lock? The lock was broken. Alan walked toward us, his steps unsteady, as if the floor were made of cotton. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open. He stopped in front of me and met my eyes. What I saw in his gaze made my heart clench, a deep, raw sorrow. There was a note on the coffee table. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. For us. He unfolded it, the paper rustled brittly. It was my grandmother's handwriting, done in fine brushstrokes, regular script, each character precise and clear. I remembered how she taught me calligraphy as a child. Your handwriting is your second face, she'd said. Her second face had always been dignified, even now when her hands shook, the strokes were nailed to the page like tacks. Alan began reading aloud, his voice quiet but crystalline. Asterisk, to my family, I've gone home to the old house for a few days. The osmanthus tree in the courtyard should be blooming soon. Don't come looking for me. I'll come back when I'm ready. In the freezer, there are dumplings, pork and celery, Alan's favorite. In the second cabinet drawer, dried tangerine peel for Ethan, steep it in hot water for your stomach. The jasmine on the balcony needs watering, once every 3 days will do. The lock's broken. No need to replace it. There's nothing valuable here. Asterisk. She called me Ethan. Only she called me Ethan. My eyes burned. When did she leave? My father's voice was hoarse. How did we not know? My mother stood by the window, her back to everyone. Her shoulders trembled. After a long silence, she turned, and I saw her eyes were red. I didn't know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She called me the day before yesterday. She said she wanted to dry some persimmons, asked if I wanted to join her. And you didn't go see her. Alan's tone was sharp. Mom, she lives alone. Her hip. I was busy. She cut him off, but the familiar brusqueness was gone. I thought she was fine. She sounded fine on the phone. The room was quiet enough to hear the clocks ticking. Uncle Robert had woken, his roomy eyes were wide, his mouth slack. Chloe's hand covered her mouth. Kyle's girlfriend stared at the tabletop, her own eyes glistening. I looked down at the note in my hands. The ink on the paper seemed to glow under the chandelier. That sentence about the jasmine, water it once every 3 days she'd written it twice. The first time, she'd added in parentheses, every 5 days is okay if you're busy. Asterisk at the very bottom, in smaller script, don't forget to water it. That jasmine is from when you were little. Asterisk. I'd planted it when I was 7. That spring, she'd taken me to the flower market, and I'd insisted on a jasmine because my kindergarten teacher said the blossoms could be brewed into tea. We potted it on her balcony, and I'd check on it every day after school. I'd grown up, gone to middle school, high school, university. My visits to her apartment had dwindled, but the jasmine had stayed. Every summer, it burst into clouds of tiny white blossoms, and the whole balcony smelled of heaven. I hadn't been there to see it in 3 summers. I'll go find her. Alan folded the note carefully and tucked it into his pocket. I'll handle the old house. You should wrap things up here. I'm coming with you. The words were out before I'd thought them. Alan gave me a look, then shook his head. You're the birthday boy. Stay with the guests. Besides, a thin smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. You should be with Gwen. I turned to Gwen. She was watching me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She gave me a tiny nod, go, I'm fine star. I'm coming with you, I repeated, harder this time. Alan. I'm coming. He held my gaze, then nodded. I rose, and my mother caught my wrist. Her fingers were cold, her grip tight. When you find her, tell her I'll have the lock replaced tomorrow. Her voice trembled. Tell her she can come home. The guest room's been empty. I looked at my mother. Her makeup was flawless, her cheongsam unrumpled, her hair immaculate. But the red veins in her eyes betrayed her. She stood under the chandelier like a beautiful porcelain vase, but inside, something had cracked. I will, I said. I'll tell her. Alan drove his white SUV, I rode shotgun. The night wind streamed through the half-open window, carrying the first cool edge of autumn. The city streetlights slid past in a golden blur. How did you find the note? I asked. It was on the coffee table, paperweight on top, right as I walked in. Alan kept his eyes on the road, his fingers gripping the wheel. She'd been gone a day or two, 2 dirty bowls in the kitchen sink, the jasmine soil was bone dry. Why didn't you call? I wanted to find her first. Then halfway to the old house, I thought better of it and came back. He paused. With her hip, the old house is in the countryside, not far, but traveling alone is hard for her. I was scared something had happened. The old house was in Qingxi town, on the outskirts, about 40 minutes by car. Our family's ancestral home, a white-walled, black-tiled courtyard house with a small yard and an osmanthus tree in the corner. As a child, we'd spent every mid-autumn festival there. My grandmother would set a round table under the tree, laden with mooncakes, persimmons, osmanthus cakes, and we children would race around while my grandfather sat in his wicker chair, waving a palm leaf fan. After my grandfather died, the old house gradually fell into disuse. My grandmother moved to the West Side apartment when I was in high school. My father had floated the idea of selling it a few times, but she'd always refused. A house shouldn't be sold, she'd said. If you sell the house, you cut the roots. Roots. The word felt heavy. The highway gave way to a narrow county road. Streetlights grew sparse, the fields on either side merged into a black blur. The sky was deep blue, scattered with a few lonely stars. Alan turned on the radio, an old Teresa Ting song came on, the story of a small town. My grandmother's favorite, she always played that CD when we visited. Alan, I said. Have we really not seen her in too long? He didn't answer. The silence stretched through 2 whole songs before he let out a quiet "Ahem." "When's the last time you visited?" I asked. "New Year's." A pause. "The second day." 8 months. 8 months. The lump in my throat felt like undercooked glutinous rice. 8 months without seeing her. Our phone calls were sporadic at best, a few minutes here and there. She'd ask if I'd eaten, if I was wearing enough layers, if work was tiring. I'd give monosyllabic answers. Then hang up. I'd never asked if she was lonely. I'd never asked if her hips still hurt. I'd never asked if the jasmine was blooming. I didn't even know she'd taken up calligraphy. She'd always used a ballpoint, said brushes were too much trouble. But on that note, every stroke was so careful, so lovely. And she'd drawn a tiny smiley face at the end, wonky, lopsided, but I knew she'd done her best. She had cataracts, 1 surgery a while back, but close vision was still fuzzy. She'd written that letter through a blur. I turned to look out the window. A cluster of farmhouse lights glowed warm and orange in the dark, and my eyes burned again. "Don't cry," Alan said, his voice rough. "When we see her, if you're crying, she'll be upset." "I'm not crying." "Right. You're not." Another silence. Teresa Ting had switched to, "When will you come again?" "I dreamed about her a few nights ago," Alan said suddenly. "What did you dream?" "She was standing under the osmanthus tree in the old yard, wearing that green cheongsam. She smiled at me and said, 'Alan, the osmanthus is blooming. Come back.' I woke up and meant to call her, but then I had 3 surgeries back to back, and by the time I finished, I'd forgotten." His voice was squeezed through his throat, barely controlled. He wasn't the type to show emotion. In the or, no matter how gnarly the case, his face stayed stone. But I heard him sniff. "It's okay," I said. "We're going to see her now. She said she'd be back in a few days." "She's fine." "Yeah." Alan nodded, but his hand stayed white-knuckled on the wheel. The car left the county road and turned onto a narrow lane lined with tall dawn redwoods. Their leaves rustled in the night breeze, moonlight filtered through, dappling the road in shifting patches. The air smelled of rice paddies and moist earth, that autumnal, country smell. It was achingly familiar. When we were kids heading to the old house, I'd roll down the window and stick my face out to feel the wind. My grandmother would always call from the back seat, "Don't lean out, it's dangerous." But then she'd laugh and say, "Smell it, that's the osmanthus." Tonight, no osmanthus, not yet. Just the faintest wisp of sweetness hiding in the crevices of the breeze. The car stopped. The old house had no porch light, it stood dark against the moonlit sky, its white walls glowing pale gray. Alan cut the engine, and we sat in the quiet for a moment. "Let's go," he said. He pushed open the wooden gate, the hinges groaned. The osmanthus in the yard was covered in tight buds, too fine to see in the dark, but the scent of them, that trace of sweetness, grew stronger. The main hall had a light on. A warm glow seeped through the carved wooden window, spilling a rectangle of brightness onto the stone steps. The door wasn't fully closed, a crack let through the sound of a radio, quietly, Teresa Ting again, singing, "Sweet, sweet." Alan pushed the door open. I stood behind him and saw her. She was sitting in the old wicker armchair, the gray tartan blanket over her knees, an open photo album on her lap. Her head was tilted, as if she'd dozed off, her white hair looked like a soft cloud of silver thread under the lamp. On the small side table beside her, a half-empty bowl of congee, a dish of pickles. By the radio, a glass jar held 2 freshly cut osmanthus branches, buds not yet open but already fragrant. Alan walked over lightly. He knelt beside the chair and said softly, "Grandma." Her eyelids fluttered. She blinked, and it took a few seconds for recognition to dawn. Then she smiled. That smile, I'd remember it forever. The curve of her lips, the crow's feet bunching into chrysanthemums at her eyes, all warmth and sweetness and unguarded joy. Alan. Her voice was soft, sleepy. What are you doing here? Alan knelt, looking up at her, his lips moved, but it took him a moment to speak. I came to see you. Nothing interesting about this old lady. She reached out and stroked his hair, her palm resting on his head like she was petting a big dog. Aren't you supposed to be at your brother's birthday party? Why'd you come all the way out here? It's over, Alan said, his voice still hoarse. Ethan's here too. She turned toward the doorway, spotted me, and her eyes lit up. Ethan. Come in, don't stand where it's drafty. I crossed the room and knelt on the other side of her chair. She took my hand, her skin was dry and thin, the veins raised like winding rivers, but her palm was warm. You've gotten thin, she said, squeezing. Are you eating right? I am, Grandma. I heard from your brother your stomach's been bothering you. I dried some tangerine peel for you, it's in the cabinet at the apartment. Remember to steep it in hot water. She turned to Alan. Did you see my note? Did you tell him? I told him. Alan nodded, his eyes were red. Grandma, why didn't you tell anyone you were coming here? We were so worried. Left you a note, didn't I? She said earnestly. And I called your mother. Said I wanted to come to the old house for a few days. She said okay. Mom said okay. Sure did. She said to be careful, and to call her when I got here. I did. Alan and I exchanged a look. Our mother had told us grandmother had called about drying persimmons, not a word about the old house. Maybe she'd said okay. Maybe she hadn't thought it mattered. Maybe she'd been so consumed with her own important things that she'd filed her mother's words away like a sticky note and promptly forgotten. I didn't blame her. I just realized we were all busy. Busy with work, with parties, with curating the photogenic fragments of our lives, with filling every minute so we wouldn't fall behind. And while we were running, my grandmother sat alone in her apartment, listening to old Teresa Ting songs, flipping through a photo album she'd thumbed 1,000 times, waiting for a phone that might or might not ring. Enough, she said, patting my hand. Have you two eaten? There's congee in the kitchen. I made a big pot. We're not hungry, Alan said. You're eating anyway. She stood, wicker creaking, and took up her cane. Slowly, carefully, she shuffled toward the kitchen, each step deliberate and steady. I reached to help, but she waved me off. I can manage. No need. She vanished through the doorway. A moment later, the clatter of bowls. Alan and I stood in the hall, saying nothing. The radio had switched to an old male crooner, "The moon represents my heart." Ethan, Alan said. Tomorrow, I'm changing the lock at her apartment. Yeah. Then we're bringing her back to stay with us. He met my eyes. Mom's guest room, it's been empty long enough. His eyes glittered under the lamp, and a faint smile tugged at his mouth. Yeah, I said. Let's do that. The congee was white rice, cooked until it dissolved into a silky porridge, a thin film of starch on top. My grandmother had poached 2 eggs in it and scattered chopped scallions over the surface, a simple, beautiful dish. Alan and I sat at the old 8-seater table, each cradling a blue and white bowl, drinking it down with appreciative slurps. A plate of pickled radish slices, thin, crisp, sour with a hint of sweetness, sat between us. She sat across from us, her cane leaning against her chair, watching us eat. The wrinkles around her eyes never relaxed. Slow down, you'll burn yourselves, she said, reaching over to brush a strand of hair from my forehead. Her fingers were cool against my skin, like a falling leaf grazing still water. "Grandma, this is the best congee ever," Alan said, lifting his bowl and grinning. That smile, eyes turned to crescents, couldn't have been further from his grim surgical mask persona. "Naturally. I've been making congee for decades." She lifted her chin with pride. "When you two spent your summers here as boys, you had this every morning." Ethan was still too young to use a spoon properly, took him forever. Alan, though, 2 bowls gone before you could blink. He's still at 2 bowls. I pointed at Alan's empty bowl. "Slow down, leave some for Grandma." She waved a hand. "There's enough. I made enough to last you 3 days." She started to stand, reaching for her cane. "I'll get you another bowl." "I'll do it." Alan was already on his feet, gently pushing her back into her chair. "Sit. I've got it." She sank back, still muttering, "The kitchen light's a bit dim, mind the step, don't trip." Alan went in. The main room fell quiet, just the radio, now tuned to a soft opera, a woman's voice lilting in a dialect I didn't understand. The melody was plaintive and long, like an unbroken thread. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah. Did you have cake today?" A white rose one. 6 tears." She nodded, then shook her head. 6 tears, too many. You young people and your grand displays." A pause. "You know, a birthday doesn't need a big cake. A bowl of long-life noodles and 2 poached eggs, that's plenty." She looked down at her hands. The age spots on her skin looked like pale brown petals. "When your father was small, I'd make him noodles for his birthday. 2 eggs. A spoonful of lard in the broth, he loved it. Could eat 2 bowls." I tried to picture my father as a child at this table, slurping noodles, and nearly laughed. But something sad lodged in my chest. The man I'd always held in awe, who ruled boardrooms and held wine glasses at banquets, he was once just a boy chasing cicadas under the osmanthus tree, blissful over a bowl of noodles. "Grandma," I said, putting down my bowl. "Please come live with us." She looked up. Her eyes were still bright despite the cataracts, clear as water-worn pebbles in a mountain stream. "I'm fine here," she said. "Fresh air. Space to move. The osmanthus. In that apartment of yours, all you see is someone else's wall, not even a sparrow. But alone. I'm used to it." A soft dismissal. "Your mother doesn't need me underfoot. She's busy enough. One more person to look after." "She wants you there," I said. "She told me tonight. Said the guest room's been waiting." She didn't reply. She turned her head toward the window, where the osmanthus stood in the moonlight, its shadow casting silver grids on the floor. Long moments passed before she sighed. "Ethan," she said, "I'm glad you feel that way. Living together, that's just formality. As long as you're well, as long as you're safe." "Grandma." Alan came out of the kitchen, bowl in hand, cutting her off. He set it down and sat. "I need to tell you something. Mom said at the dinner tonight that she wants you home. The guest room's ready." She said it in front of everyone. My grandmother blinked. "Really? Really?" Alan glanced at me, I nodded hard. "She actually said that. Actually said it. I heard her." Her fingertips tapped the wood grain. Her face stayed composed, but I caught the tiny upward quiver at the corner of her mouth before she pressed her lips flat. "Let's see," she said. "Neutral. You finish your congee first. It's no good cold." Alan and I exchanged a look. We didn't push. Some things need time to steep, like tea, or tangerine peel. That night we slept in the east wing. My grandmother brought out 2 quilted cotton blankets, blue and white patterns, aired and fluffy, smelling of sun and cedar. She made the beds, and as she did, she slipped a piece of candy under each pillow, a chewy toffee wrapped in transparent rice paper. She used to do that, Alan said, settling under the covers, flipping the candy in his fingers. Every time we came back, a candy under the pillow. You remember, I said. Of course. I used to be more excited for that than for Christmas. I didn't answer. Outside, the osmanthus rustled in the breeze, its shadow moving across the paper window screen like an ink-wash painting. The radio was off, the house was deep as still water. From next door came the slow, hobbling footsteps of my grandmother, washing up, she was, the tap turning on and off, a basin being set on a wooden stand. Then quiet. I turned toward the wall. Old newspaper wallpaper, yellowed and curling at the edges. In the moonlight, I could just make out faded headlines, chipped characters. Ethan, Alan said from across the room. Soft. Yeah. Think Mom will come tomorrow? Maybe. I don't think so. Alan's voice was certain. She can't swallow her pride. That thing she said at dinner, that was her limit. He was right. Our mother wore dignity like a crown, balancing it as carefully as a bowl of water on her head. To admit fault, to reach out first, that had always been impossible. Tonight, the water had sloshed over. So what do we do? Call her tomorrow. Tell her grandma's doing well. Ease her mind. He turned over, the bed creaked. And we keep showing up, keep making grandma see we mean it. Yeah. Sleep. We'll water the jasmine in the morning. 3 days or 5. She wrote both. Soil's cracked now. Forget 3 or 5, water it. I laughed, pulling the blanket up to my nose. It smelled of sun. I let my eyes close, hearing Alan's breathing slow, the osmanthus whispering outside, something like a lullaby. I dreamed. I was 7 again. Summer afternoon. The osmanthus in the yard was a sapling, just shoulder high. My grandmother knelt by the flower bed, planting jasmine. I squatted beside her, digging little holes and dropping pebbles into them. She didn't scold, she just smiled. Sunlight filtered through the locust leaves, spattering her with gold. She said, Ethan, when the jasmine grows up, it will bloom. The whole balcony will smell wonderful. We'll pick the flowers and brew tea. I said, I'll brew a whole pot and drink it all. She said, you can't drink it all alone. You'll save some for your brother, for your father, for your mother. A family shares. I said, and for grandma. She laughed, eyes crinkling, yes. And for grandma. In the dream the light was perfect, the jasmine leaves glossy green. My grandmother was young, hair salt and pepper, not white, back straight. She smiled at me over a handful of damp soil. Ethan, she said. Pass me the watering can. I reached for it, and woke. Morning. The birds were in full chorus. Sunlight flooded through the paper window, saturating the room in gold. Alan's bed was empty, blanket neatly folded, his toffee sat on my pillow, he'd left it for me. I dressed and stepped outside. A white-headed bulbul was perched on the osmanthus, it cocked its head at me, chirped, and flew off. Alan was on the balcony, watering the jasmine with a galvanized sprinkler, the droplets trembling on the leaves. The soil's rock hard, he said, frowning. 1 can isn't enough, needs a soak. She must have been too busy moving to water it. I knelt beside the pot. The leaves were limp, yellowing at the edges, but tiny buds clung to the stems like green pearls. I poked the soil, dry as sand. We'll soak it from the well, I said. Yeah. Alan set the can down. Grandma's making scallion pancakes for breakfast. My nose prickled. Scallion pancakes, another taste of childhood. Hers were simple, no yeast, just flour and water, rolled thin, spread with lard and scallions, rolled again, pan-fried until golden and crisp, flaking into layers of fragrant goodness. I went to the kitchen. She was at the stove, her back to me, in a navy cotton tunic, her hair pinned behind her ears. Thin as a paper cutout, but her motions were still agile. She heard my step. "Ethan. Hot water in the basin. Wash and come eat." "Okay." I stood in the doorway watching. Morning light fell through the little window, pooling on the stove, where the cast iron pan sent up steam and fragrance. She flipped the pancake with careful attention, as if it were the most important thing in the world. It struck me then, she'd always been like this. Alone at the stove, making food, sunning blankets, drying peel, wrapping dumplings, pickling radishes. Her gestures were small, so easy to overlook. But they were the bricks of what we called home. We thought home was a house, an apartment, a chandelier. It wasn't. Home was a bowl of congee. A candy under the pillow. A jasmine that waited, even when the soil went dry. Home was someone standing at the stove with her back to you, asking, "Up? Hot water's ready." After breakfast Alan called our mother. He stood under the osmanthus tree, phone to his ear, one hand in his pocket. I sat on the threshold with my tangerine peel tea, watching his back. His shoulders were hunched, he was bracing himself. I caught fragments, "Doing well, great spirits, made scallion pancakes this morning, yeah we stayed over, she wants to stay a few more days." "Mom, do you want to?" Then his voice dipped. He turned, caught my eye, gave a complicated look, and wrapped up the call. He came over and sat beside me on the step. The wood was polished smooth from years of use, a shallow dip where people had sat before. "What did she say?" I asked. "She has a meeting this afternoon. Can't make it." Pause. "But she's having the cook make braised pork for tomorrow. And she asked if Grandma needs anything. Anything else?" "No." I sipped my tea. Warm, bitter at first, then a sweet aftertaste. She always remembered these small things, better than I did. "She won't come," Alan said. "I know." But her voice on the phone, he paused. "Different. Usually she starts with whatever she's doing. Today, first thing she asked was, 'How's Grandma?' I think she cares. She just can't say it. Mom's never been good at saying things." Alan laughed. "True." We sat on the step, watching the osmanthus. Sunlight advanced, pushing the tree's shadow toward the wall. The bulbul returned, perching on the clothesline, studying us, then preening under its wing. "Alan." "Ethan." She stuck her head out. "Get off the cold step. Come peel beans for me, we're having bean sprouts with pork strips." "We're coming." We sat in the kitchen on low stools, with a basin of bean pods piled high. She sat opposite, trimming chives, shooting us occasional glances, her chrysanthemum smile never fading. "Grandma, where'd you get these beans?" Alan asked, snapping pods. "The ones in the city market are never this fresh. From Aunt Zhang next door. Ran into her the day I got back, and she pressed a whole basket on me." She tossed a withered chive end aside. "She asked about you too. How tall have those boys of the Qing family gotten?" "Aunt Zhang," I pictured. "The one with the big yellow dog." "Same. The old dog died last year, she's got a new puppy now. Yellow, 3 months old, round as a ball." "Is her date tree still there?" "Sure is. Lots of fruit this year." She said she'd bring us a basket when they're ripe. I stripped beans and felt a stillness settle over me. Different from city life. There, everything raced: morning commutes, meetings, rush hour cooking, rushed washing, rushed sleep. Here, shelling beans was just shelling beans. Trimming chives was just trimming chives. Time stretched, soft and pliable, like dough. She kept chattering: Aunt Zhang's puppy, old Mr. Wang's grandson getting into university, the persimmons on the hill doing well. Alan and I listened, contributing a word now and then. Beans clicked into the basin. Lunch: bean sprouts with pork strips, and a steamed egg custard drizzled with soy and sesame oil, trembling on the spoon. All three of us at the 8-seater, 3 bowls of rice, 3 dishes, wiped clean. Afterward, Alan washed up. I went to water the jasmine. Well, water was icy cold. I poured it slowly over the soil, hearing it hiss as it sank into the cracks. Limp leaves perked up slightly, not yet vibrant, but alive. Ethan, she called from the door. Move the pot under the osmanthus. Morning sun, afternoon shade. I did. The jasmine was lighter than I'd expected, the soil was so dry. I set it on the stone ledge by the tree. Sun filtered through the osmanthus leaves, dappling the jasmine's leaves with gold. She came over slowly, leaning on her cane, and stopped beside the pot. She touched a yellowing leaf with her fingertip, as gently as if it were a sleeping child. 21 years, she said. You planted this when you were 7. 21. Older than your cousin Kyle. A soft laugh. We've repotted it a few times. Pruned it. One winter it nearly froze. I brought it inside for a month and nursed it back. I knelt by the pot, peering at the yellowing edges. The veins were still green, though the margins had faded, like a person whose hair had gone white but whose eyes stayed bright. Will it recover? I asked. Of course. Certainty in her voice. Jasmine is hardy. As long as the roots are alive, give it water and sun, and it'll come back. People are the same. She said the last sentence not to the flower but to me. Her eyes held that clear spring water gleam. Grandma, I said, my voice thick, you too. You need to get more sun, more. I know. She patted my hand. You came to water me, didn't you? My eyes stung. All day, stinging like a child's. But with her, it was okay to be that child. Enough. She wiped my cheek with her dry, warm palm. Come inside. I've got a watermelon, Aunt Zhang brought it. It's been chilling in the well all morning. That afternoon we sat in the hall under the electric fan, eating watermelon. The flesh was sandy, crimson, bursting with sweetness. She ate slowly, small bites, juice dripping onto her apron. She wiped it with the hem and kept going. Watching her, I remembered something. Grandma, I said. That nursery rhyme you used to sing to me, can you still do it? She paused. Which one? The watermelon one, watermelon round and bright, cut in 2 boats of light, 1 boat to Grandma's shore, 1 boat to my room at night. She laughed until a tear squeezed from her eye. I made that up on the spot. You remember? Of course. I always sang it wrong. Grandma's shore came out as door or something. You laughed for ages. Sing it for me now. I hesitated. Alan egged me on. Come on, sing. No one's listening. I cleared my throat, sang softly. The verse came back. I sang it all, then laughed at myself. She cackled, banging the table, nearly dropping her watermelon. Alan doubled over, claiming his teeth hurt. Laughter spilled out of the old house, past the courtyard, past the osmanthus, startling the bulbul into flight. As it streaked away, I swear I saw a green osmanthus leaf in its beak, flashing in the sun. That evening, Alan called our mother again. This time I stood beside him. Mom, Grandma says she's making dumplings tomorrow. What filling do you like? A pause. Her voice came through, softer than before, pork and cabbage. Light on ginger. Great. Can you come? Join us. Another pause, stretching so long I lost hope. Then, I have a meeting that ends at 2. After that, we'll see. Her voice was calm, but in the background I heard something, paper rustling. She was flipping through something. Then a moment later, another sentence. Alan, tell Grandma, when she waters the jasmine, don't overdo it. Too much water rots the roots. Remind her. He hung up and turned to me. We stood under the osmanthus, the evening breeze rustling the leaves. Neither spoke. But we smiled. She came the next afternoon. Alan and I were squatting by the jasmine, loosening the soil. The earth was dark and damp, smelling of wet clay. The leaves were perking up, still yellow at the margins, but fresh green had returned to the centers. My grandmother sat in her wicker chair under the tree, eyes closed, soaking up the sun, a palm leaf fan moving lazily in her hand. The gate was ajar. I heard its hinge creak, looked up, and saw her. Our mother stood in the doorway. She wore a cheongsam of deep green, a shade much like the one in my grandmother's portrait, but simpler, with no frogging, just a silver brooch at her collar. Her hair was still immaculate, but a few strands had come loose in the breeze. In her hand she held an insulated bag, the edge of a container poking out, braised pork, I guessed. She didn't move. She stared at the scene, my grandmother beneath the osmanthus, Alan squatting by the flower pot with dirt-caked hands, me holding a little trowel. Sunlight gilded the courtyard, filling the air with earth and well water. Her face went blank, as if she'd opened a door into a painting. Mom. Alan stood, wiping his hands on his pants. You came. She nodded and stepped in. Her heels clicked on the stone, louder than anything in the quiet. She walked to the tree and looked down at my grandmother. My grandmother looked up, her fan pausing briefly, then resuming its lazy arc. You came, she said. Matter of fact, as if commenting on the weather. Our mother's lips pressed together. I brought braised pork. Our cook made it. Try it. Put it in the kitchen. She walked past me, and for a moment she hesitated. Her gaze found mine, then dropped to the tuft of hair that always stuck up at my crown. She pressed it down with one finger. Your hair's flying, she said softly, and continued to the kitchen. I stood frozen, the ghost of her touch on my scalp. It was so light, like my grandmother brushing my forehead, earlier. The two gestures, decades apart, were strangely the same. From the kitchen, the clink of dishes, the rush of a tap, the soft thud of the fridge door. She was putting things away, transferring pork to a plate, wrapping leftovers, wiping the stovetop. Her motions were brisk, quiet, instinctual, so much like my grandmother's. My grandmother rose slowly from her chair and shuffled toward the kitchen. Alan moved to help, she waved him off. I followed, and as she reached the kitchen I heard her say, "Third shelf of the cupboard, the blue and white plate's clean. Use that one." I know. Our mother's voice answered. You brought that plate with you when you were married, didn't you? You remember that. How could I forget? When you moved to the apartment, you wouldn't take it with you, afraid it'd get chipped. I said you were making too much of a plate. A soft laugh, like wind through osmanthus leaves. Of course, she said. A good plate needs good food. That pork you brought deserves it. I stood in the doorway, Alan beside me. We watched the two of them, our mother at the stove, arranging pork on the plate, our grandmother beside her, leaning on her cane, adjusting the pieces with a knowing hand, placing the prettiest ones on top. The light from the window fell behind them, and their shadows merged on the kitchen wall, one tall, one short, side by side. That night we made dumplings together. Pork and cabbage filling, she made the mix, our mother made the dough, Alan and I rolled wrappers and stuffed them. We pushed 2 tables together, dusted them with flour that looked like fresh snow. She sat at the head, directing, roll them thinner, or they won't cook right. Don't overstuff, they'll burst. Ethan, that folds wrong, like this, her fingers guided mine, I fumbled. My dumplings came out lopsided, like crooked little pillows. Alan's were pristine, lined up in neat rows on the board, each with the same number of pleats. Our mother admired them. Alan, you learned that from your father. He used to make them just as neat. A beat. Before he got too busy to do it. My grandmother glanced at her but said nothing, just added another pinch of salt to the filling. Less salt, Grandma, I said. Blood pressure. What blood pressure? My doctor said it's normal. A pointed look at our mother. It's her that should watch her salt. Our mother's rolling pin paused, then moved again. A quiet No argument. When the dumplings came to the table, the night had fully set. The hall's bulb was warm and dim, nowhere near as bright as a chandelier, but the soft yellow softened every face, blurred every line. 4 dipping bowls of vinegar, a dish of mashed garlic, a plate of our grandmother's pickled sugar garlic. Our mother took a dumpling first. Bite. Chewed. Then she said, perfect filling. Better than any restaurant. Our grandmother, from across the table, picked one up and bit it. She frowned slightly. Cabbage could have been chopped finer. Alan, your knife skills need work. Alan hung his head. I was in a rush. Rush, dumplings can't be rushed. Your father, she stopped, glanced at our mother, your father used to chop filling for half an hour. Finer it is, the more flavor, he said. Our mother took another dumpling, dipped it in vinegar, and said nothing. But I saw her chopsticks pause at the rim of the bowl. Your father, my grandmother said, nibbling a pickled garlic clove, used to love cooking when he was young. Weekends, if he was home, he'd make a whole feast. Then business took over. His braised pork. He learned from me, but he made his own improvements, better than mine, actually. Our mother finally spoke, he still cooks. Rarely. Few times a year. Tell him to cook more, my grandmother said. Business never ends, meals are for eating. Tell him I said so. Our mother nodded. The barest smile at the corner of her mouth. The clock read 7:30. Through the window, the chorus of insects and frogs rose and fell. The lamp lit our 4 faces, warm, soft, as if cupped in a giant hand. Alan poured me another bowl of dumpling broth. The steam bathed my face, the air smelled of wheat and vinegar. Outside, the osmanthus stood in the dark, its buds loosening, a few brave blossoms had opened, and their fragrance crept in through the cracks of the door, blending with the steaming broth. If a passerby had glanced through the carved window, they'd have seen 4 people around a table, sharing a meal, just an ordinary, warm family scene. No belated reconciliations, no guilt, no waiting. Just a family eating hot dumplings, talking of small things. But I knew better. This night had taken us a long time and a long road. Our mother had walked from the banquet hall to the West Side apartment, then from the apartment to the old house, a 40-minute drive, but it had taken her 3 days. My grandmother had walked from behind that locked iron door, caught a ride no one knew about, and made it back here, and no one knew how hard that journey had been, with her hip. But they had both arrived. That was enough. After dinner, our mother volunteered to wash dishes. Our grandmother didn't stop her, just took the apron off its hook and handed it over. Our mother tied it on, stood at the sink, and washed each bowl carefully, head bent. The water ran. I heard her murmur, half to herself, "The water's so cold." "Well, water," my grandmother answered from the hole. "Cold is good. Clean's better. Tomorrow I'll have someone install a water heater. No need to go to all that trouble." "It's no trouble." Our mother's voice was quiet. "In winter, washing with cold water cracks your hands." My grandmother didn't argue. She sat in her chair, peeling an orange, and offered a slice to me, then to Alan. It was sweet, and as the juice burst on my tongue, I heard our mother humming in the kitchen. Fragmented, soft, like something old and slow, like tangerine peel tea. Alan whispered, "She's in a good mood." I nodded, mouth full. That night our mother didn't leave. She slept in the west wing. My grandmother made up the bed with freshly aired blankets, pale purple with tiny flowers. I passed by the door and saw her sitting on the edge of the bed, turning one of the candies over in her fingers. Then she unwrapped it and put it in her mouth. Her profile was lit by moonlight. I noticed, with a start, how the corner of her mouth was beginning to curve like my grandmother's. Same smile line, same crinkles at the eyes. With the candy in her cheek, she looked almost childish. She caught me in the doorway and flushed. "What are you staring at? Go to bed." "Mom," I said. "Good night." She hesitated. The word came out muffled, through toffee, "Good night." Back in the east wing, Alan was already under the covers, head on the pillow. He made room for me. "Mom's asleep?" he asked. "Yeah. Eating toffee." Alan laughed, quiet, satisfied. "Just like we used to. The candy Grandma gave us, we'd keep it in our mouths forever before chewing." I slid under the covers, sun-scented warmth all around. The osmanthus was stronger tonight, more blossoms must have opened. A cool breeze crept through the window gap, but I was cocooned, not cold. "Ethan," Alan said. "Yeah. Will Mom come back tomorrow?" "She probably has a meeting. But she said she might after." A pause. "It doesn't matter. Grandma's here. We're here. She'll come when she's ready." I didn't answer. But I thought, she'll be back. She'd taken the first step. The rest of the road, she'd walk at her own pace. Just like our grandmother, step by step, careful, steady. Once you take the first step, the rest is easier. Outside, the osmanthus whispered. A bloom opened in the darkness. I breathed in its sweetness, along with the scent of sun-warmed blankets, the steady rhythm of my mother's breathing in the next room, the creak of Alan turning over. Autumn had truly begun.